EU leaders are back at the negotiating table today after days of difficult haggling of the bloc's next budget and a pandemic recovery fund worth some €750 billion. The talks began on Friday in Brussels and were only supposed to take 2 days. By early Monday morning, leaders remained deadlocked over the size and terms of the recovery fund. France, Germany and the bloc's virus-ravaged member states are calling for the bulk of the money to be distributed as EU grants, but the so-called frugal countries want more of the money distributed as loans with strict conditions attached. Well, our correspondent Jack Parrick joins me now from Brussels. Well, hello there to you, Jack. It seems that after all this feuding and banging of fists, leaders might be reaching a turning point, and there's a glimmer of hope that an agreement might be reached.
Well, there is still hope, Isabel, but it's hard to tell whether that it will happen today, perhaps even tomorrow. We've seen delays and delays and delays. They were meant to meet as a full group of 27 at 2 p.m. Then it was 5 p.m. Now we're told it's not going to be until 6 p.m. Central European time. So there is still ongoing discussions bilaterally between them. We understand that the negotiations are now on this issue of the size of the grants, that potentially it's probably going to be capped somewhere between 380, 390 billion euros, and that perhaps it might be signified off sort of 2018 numbers, meaning that other leaders can sell it as a sort of 400 billion euro pot. There are all sorts of options going down at the minute. One of the men that is really putting a stick in the mud at this summit is Mark Rutte, the Dutch Prime Minister. He is being he's sort of the leader, so for want of a better description, of the frugal 4, frugal 5 countries. And we managed to catch up with him just outside of a hotel here in Brussels ahead of the summit.
We are fighting for clear reforms, the necessary in all member states. We are fighting for to maintain the rebates. And we want to have absolute certainty that reforms take place. That's the things I'm fighting for. Those are the things I'm fighting for. I'm trying to fight for European interests, Dutch interests, a strong European Union, a strong Netherlands, and then we need reforms all over Europe to make the Union stronger. Of course, we need solidarity now in times of crisis, clearly. We need the reforms to really be implemented, crucial. And we want to maintain the rebates. So I think we have a legitimate legitimate objective.
So while he's sort of leading the frugal countries, the southern EU member states, countries like Italy and Spain, are saying that money needs to be large in size, there needs to be enough money, and that it needs to be able to be dispersible without conditions. And countries in the east, Hungary, Poland, for instance, are rejecting any conditionality. They don't want rule of law conditions imposed. Now, here to discuss this a little bit further with me is Johan van Overtveld, who is a former Belgian finance minister, head of the Budget Committee here at the European Parliament in Brussels. What do you make of this? The Dutch Prime Minister is really sticking his heels in on this. Is this going to change the image of the Netherlands, change the image of Mark Rutte himself in the European Union?
Like most politicians who are doing European politicians, they still remain national politicians. And so what Mark Rutte certainly is first of all concerned about is his reputation in Holland. There are elections coming up in 8 months' time in Holland. And he has a clear majority. Every opinion poll shows that the Dutch population is in a large majority behind him on these issues. So my bet is that he will stand his ground and that it will be rather difficult to move. Of course, at one time he will also have to compromise. But I think his preparedness to move is very limited.
Now, they're watering down this sum. It's getting sort of chipped away throughout the summit, down to sort of under 400 billion euros now. Is this going to really hinder Europe from recovering from the coronavirus crisis, or will a pot that size still be enough?
Well, it depends on what happens next. I mean, we've seen in recent, literally days, an increase again in the number of COVID people being hurt by COVID. If that leads to new lockdowns, even on a partial basis, that will have enormous economic consequences, and certainly uncertainty will mount. The preparedness of companies to invest, anxiety of people who will also be very hesitant to spend, so we'll have a lot of economic problems. The more these problems become acute, the more governments will have to take responsibility for stepping up and keeping the economy alive. And certainly Europe has a role to play there. Whether that's a role for 500 or 300 or 700 billion is hard to predict. But that's why I think conditionality is so important. If you have projects that are really related to COVID and the consequences of COVID, they should be looked upon seriously. But there should be a link with COVID and its consequences.
Now, while this recovery fund is being discussed, they're also negotiating the EU's budget, known as the MFF, and that is normally extremely complicated without this sort of recovery fund. There's lots of issues regarding greening the economies of Europe, the common agricultural policy, the farming funds. Is it possible to get a deal? Are we going to get a deal in the next couple of days with so many complicated aspects connected?
It's certainly possible to get a deal. Whether it's easy to do, that's another thing. And what we've seen in the last 2 or 3 days shows that it's very difficult. My personal opinion about this is that with all the necessity of having something for COVID, that the attention for the longer term budget has a little bit been watered down. And that's unfortunately because you have programs like Horizon and InvestEU, for example, which are very important for the longer run, for the European Union, for the citizens, to keep up in the worldwide competitiveness struggle with the United States and China. And certainly now that's, for example, why I thought that the cuts proposed in the Horizon program were really not very sensible thing to do at this point in time, when you need science and related organizations to step up their efforts to see that we can get to this health ordeal that is presently ours.
These are all the balls being juggled for the leaders as they continue for this summit. Johan van Overveld, thank you so much for joining us here. This summit is continuing. Your guess is as good as mine, Isabel, at how long it might last.
I know the pressure's certainly on in Brussels there. Jack Parrick, many thanks.